Looks like we're at the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. This is Jem McGraw with Acumen. And on behalf of our account management team, I wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today. We are going to be focusing on Sage Fixed Assets and give you a solution overview. This is one of our many webinar Wednesdays that Acumen has been hosting every other week. We're trying to provide educational webinars for customers on solutions that we really support and know will make your lives easier and save with a lot of processes. So we've been working with Wayne for many, many years, and I'm sure you'll enjoy what he's going to show us today. So with that, I will turn it over to Wayne with Sage Fixed Assets.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us for another great webinar brought to you by your friends at Acumen. My name is Wayne Austin. I'm a sales engineer on the fixed asset solution with Sage, and today I'm going to give you a complete overview of the solution and share with you some great information about how it can help your business and how it integrates with Sage 300. So what I'll be covering will be the fixed asset solution overview completely, looking at all of the various components, the integration, as well as actually spend some time in the solution so you can get a pretty good feel for how intuitive it is to use and maybe how it would apply to your particular business needs as far as your fixed asset management. Now, the Sage Fixed Asset Solution is actually a complete fixed asset management tool. So you can actually manage your fixed assets through their complete life cycle. So I know your business needs will vary, so all of you may not need all of the various components, but you'll certainly be able to get a good feel from this demonstration with what parts of the solution would actually fit your particular business needs. So let's look at those components. Typically, if you look at a fixed asset's complete life cycle, some assets you may purchase and it may be placed directly in service to start depreciation. In that situation, you would be certainly looking at using the depreciation module where you can calculate depreciation for tax or GAAP. Now, for those of you that may have assets coming out of some type of project, be it a renovation or let's say you're in the hospitality vertical, you're getting a new phone system or you're doing some renovations of rooms, things like that, that are going to accumulate cost throughout that project and eventually create multiple assets from that particular project. That's a scenario that you would use a planning module where you will be able to do reporting against your total spend throughout that project's lifespan and be able to send any assets to be created directly from that planning module into the depreciation module to start depreciation. The tracking module is what's used for handling physical inventory of your assets, which you may typically do on an annual basis. That way, you'll have an opportunity of identifying ghost or zombie assets and making sure your asset registry is actually correct. And I will go deeper into all of these components so that you have a better understanding before seeing the solution with how these components works. The reporting module, there's many reports built into the system natively, so it has really robust reporting, but the additional custom reporting feature gives you a fully integrated version of Crystal Reports that I'll be able to talk about a bit more as well. So let's take a look at the planning modules. So depending on the type of projects you have, it could be anything from software development, renovation, adding new equipment, whatever the case may be, but there's some delay between when you're working through this project, accumulating cost, be it from purchase orders, materials, labor, whatever the case may be, and need to be able to do some reporting against that. You will have all of those components built into the solution. Now, the graphic on the right is just a quick project snapshot, which when you open any of your projects, you can actually have this feature launched. And if you look at the top left-hand portion, you can see it's going to show you what's spent up the budget, what's unspent, even what's capitalized and what's expensed. And if you look to the lower right portion, you can see your actual spending against two sets of numbers. So if you've got an original budget or an approved amount or a revised budget, you can actually track your spend in this project against both pieces. Now, once any of these items within a project are completed and ready to be placed in service, even if the entire project is not complete, you actually have the ability to send any of those assets directly to the depreciation module to be placed in service and actually start depreciation. You can actually even split a single line item into multiple assets of equal or different value. Now, let's talk about the depreciation module. The depreciation module is actually the heart of the solution. This is where you'll have your 7 books you can work with, so that you'll have your tax, federal tax, state tax, your internal book for GAAP, AMT, ACE books, and 2 custom books that you can rename and repurpose in any way you choose. Now, if you take a look at the graphic on the right, one of the features built in, just like in the planning module, you can actually get a quick snapshot of what's going on with all of the assets in your company at a quick high-level view. So one of the things you're seeing here, that central graphic, is showing what's placed in service by quarter. So if, for example, you're doing maker's depreciation, and one of the things you need to be able to see is what's being placed in service by quarter. So if you exceed that 40% placed in service in Q4, and need to be able to do a mid-quarter convention switch, the system actually allows you to do that as a global switch. Some of the tools built in to help you actually be efficient throughout the year and avoid being audited, there's actually an audit advisor. So this is a report you can run for any fiscal, and if there's any scenario or anything happening in your company that could be a potential red flag for getting audited, it's actually going to highlight that where you'll see that red X. It's going to tell you what issue it sees. It's going to recommend a resolution, and will actually even create a group so that any asset triggering that particular red flag can be easily identified, and you can take the appropriate action. You also have the ability, if you're going to be a multiple user environment, to be able to limit who can do certain functions within the system. So you have security level at the company level, so you can limit who can access each particular company. And once within the company, there's another profile setting where you can limit who can do disposals, transfers, even what reports they can access, and a variety of other things you can do at a pretty granular level, so that however you want your workflow to be, however you want your access levels controlled, you actually have that ability to do this in the profile settings in the depreciation module. There are many standard reports built in, and you can actually do some customization within the solution, such as changing sort orders, reporting on different subsets of the assets, and so on. For those of you that are going to be doing the tax book, even if you're using an outside CPA firm, you'll see that the tax reporting is pretty robust. So you can actually generate an actual 4562. You can also generate your tax expense report, which is used for reconciling that 4562. You can also generate other reports, such as the 4797 sale of property worksheet, and many, many standard reports built in. Once I actually go into the solution, I'll actually go through some of the standard reports that you're typically going to need for year-end or even on a monthly basis, and I'll share with you how your journal entry would be sent from depreciation over to Sage 300. The tracking module. Now, many people, unfortunately, don't do a full physical inventory of their assets on a regular basis. And this is actually pretty important, because one of the things our tracking module is going to help you do, you'll be able to actually barcode those assets, assign asset ID numbers that are associated with those barcodes, do complete inventories, so that you have an opportunity for identifying ghost or zombie assets. Now, ghost assets are simply going to be assets that are on your books, but they're nowhere to be found. They're either lost or stolen. So if you've got a theft or a fraud situation going off, this is a really great way to actually head that off, because you will be able to generate a report at the end of doing that inventory to identify those items that were on your books and they're nowhere to be found. There's actually an ROI calculator if you go out on the Sage Fixed Assets website at www.sagefixedassets.com, so you can actually plug in your numbers and get a pretty good idea of what your particular scenario may be as far as potential costs for tax overpayment or property tax overpayment or insurance premiums. Now, the tracking module actually uses the same database as the depreciation module. So any of the groups you created in depreciation, any templates or general information fields that you have in the depreciation side are also available here. But in the tracking module, there's no access to the book field. So if you have a different team that's going to be handling doing your physical inventories, such as an asset manager or your IT staff or whoever may be doing it, that does not need access to the book fields, there's no way for them to actually do anything that's going to impact depreciation. So it's a really great safety net. Now, for doing these physical inventories, you can use a traditional scanner, which of course will simply use an infrared port. Any of the fields you push out to these devices, you can actually update while doing that inventory. So if an asset is moved or there's some other information that's changed, someone that's actually doing the inventory will be able to actually make those changes. Once that is complete, you can send that data back to the system, and all of those changes can then be updated and accepted in the depreciation and tracking modules, since those common fields between both would be updated at the same time. Now, in addition to using a traditional scanner, you can also use an Android app. Now, the Android app will not require any kind of a physical connection to a workstation running the software. It'll simply use Microsoft OneDrive. So you would simply need a Wi-Fi connection long enough to be able to download an inventory list, send that inventory list out, go off-site to wherever you may need to, and do that physical inventory. Once complete, you can reconnect to Wi-Fi and upload those results back to the system. Now, the actual tracking software itself requires a license, but the Android app or physical scanners, those do not actually require a license. So you can have as many users as you want for doing the physical inventory at one of those devices without using up a software license. For custom reporting, so like I said, standard in the system, you'll have many standard reports that you can do for all of your basic or standard needs. You can customize those reports to some extent in the system by changing the sort order or reporting on different subsets. Where this additional custom reporting comes in, it's going to give you a fully integrated version of SAP Crystal Reports, and we're running currently version 2016, where you can create any type of ad hoc report you want to. You can literally create anything you want from scratch because it's fully integrated in the database and has access to every field in the database. And this actually works with all modules of the software. You can actually even start by using a standard report, export it to Crystal Reports, and further customize it there if you want to go beyond what you can do in the system. Now, by having this custom reporting feature, it also gives you some additional capability inside the solution where you will actually be able to add or remove different columns of data to standard reports and change the orientations, change header and footer information, and things like that. So it expands the capability of the reporting features and functionality in the solution, as well as give you the ability to do any type of ad hoc reporting you want to build from scratch with access to every field in the database. Now let's talk about the Sage 300 integration. So this is just a screenshot from inside of Sage 100 where I've set up a visual workflow. Now, if you're already using these visual workflows, you might be familiar with that. For those of you who are not, I'm quite certain that Jen and the team at Acumen can help you with configuring that. Most of the configuration for setting up the integration between the fixed asset solution and Sage 300 is actually done in the Sage 300 side, and all of the directions and information for setting that up is actually in the fixed assets links guide. So as far as asset creation, inside of Sage 300 from the accounts payable module, you can create assets, and that's going to be a one-to-one relationship. So you're doing one transactions in AP, you can create a single asset. On the purchase order side, it's a one-to-many. So I can be doing a single purchase order and create 100 assets in the fixed assets module. Now, once I go into the fixed assets module, I'm actually going to show you some templates there, which is also very handy because you can create templates for different types of assets. So if you're doing an asset creation from a PO module in Sage 300, let's say, you can tell it to actually apply templates. And what that's going to do, in addition to the information it's getting from Sage 300, such as value, place and service date, and any other miscellaneous information, it will merge it with the template data, which you can then include things like depreciation method, estimated life for any of the books, so that when you're creating assets from a PO, you don't have to touch it or have any duplicate entry in the depreciation side. Everything is going to be set up, ready to start depreciating, even with the correct depreciation method and estimated life for tax, for GAAP, and any of the books that you're using. So I'm going to take a few moments now and actually go into the solution so that you can get a pretty good feel for how this may work in your particular business environment. Okay, so I'm going to actually start off in the depreciation module. Now, as I stated, this is really the heart of the solution. There's a couple of different versions. There's a standard standalone version. There's a standard network version. And the version I'm actually in is a premier version, which runs on the SQL server. The other versions run on the Sybase database. Now, the asset snapshot that you're seeing, that's similar to the graphic I showed you in the slide presentation, actually gives you some great information about what's going on with the assets in the company. So this is a screen that I mentioned. It's going to show you what's placed in service by quarter. I can view this information by any of the books. It's also going to give me a quick breakdown of the total net value of all of the assets in the company, as well as breaks it down by what's active, what's disposed, what's inactive, or transferred, and so on. I can even get some other information, such as a depreciation comparison, looking at acquired value versus accumulated depreciation. I can see what my 5-year spend has been, and I can even look at a breakdown of remaining life, which might be helpful in determining when you may not need to start replacing some assets that are fully depreciated. So it's just a handy tool, and you can actually run that at any point. Now, there are some really great tools built into the solution that will actually help you with managing your fixed assets, and really intuitive tools that can help you make many changes in the system that you may need to, depending on your particular scenario. This view here is actually customizable as well. You can choose what columns of data you want to see, what sequence you want to see them in. And if I actually go into an asset detail here, we'll talk about both sides of this, the upper area here, which is your general information fields, and of course your book fields down below. But before doing that, let me actually show you some resources that are pretty helpful. If you go to Help, What's New, and click on Learn More, it's going to show you any feature changes in the current release, as well as any tax rule changes. So for those of you handling the tax book, this is going to be very important, because in this particular release, for example, you can see here that it includes all of the changes for the Bipartisan Budget Act. If you're doing bonus depreciation and you want to take a look back at the rules from last year's TCJA tax rule changes last January, which were pretty significant changes, you can actually have a quick reference, look up all of the rules surrounding bonus depreciation, for example. It's going to show the old law info, the new law information, So you have a pretty quick reference that you can take advantage of. Now, we've also added, of course, some of the additional changes this year for that Form 199A. And one of the other features we've added 2 new depreciation methods, and that's your remaining value mid-month and half year. So for those of you that may qualify to take advantage of those tax extenders, you'll need to take advantage of using one of those depreciation methods. So if you take a look at these fields here, these 5 fields that I'm circling, any asset you're adding, be it manually in the system or importing from Excel, you need to be sure you're identifying the property type, and it's just simply looking for your standard IRS property types: personal property, real property, amortizable assets, and so on. And of course, acquisition and in-service date, value, depreciation methods, and estimated life. It also supports ADS. So if you are doing ADS depreciation, you can populate that info. And we also have ADS depreciation methods built into the solution. Now, any of the books you're not using, you can actually turn those off. So let me actually show you how you would do that. If you go into Edit Company, I can turn off any of the books that I'm not using. So if you're simply doing GAAP, you can simply turn off your federal and state tax books. If you're not using any of these custom books on the end here, you can actually turn them off as well or rename them any way you choose. Now, one of the main differences between the standard version and the premier version that I'm currently in is the type of fiscal calendars that are supported. And the premier version, if you have a need to be on an alternate reporting period, such as a 445 or 13 period, the premier version is the only one that supports alternate reporting periods. It also has a higher capacity. And the premier version will handle over 1 million assets in a company, whereas if you're on the standard version, most people will tend to switch over somewhere between 10 or 20,000 assets. So capacity and some functionality differences are things to consider if you're looking at the solution for your particular organization. But how that would work, Jenny or one of the folks at Acumen would schedule a demonstration for you where it would actually go through your particular business scenario and determine what version really would be appropriate for your situation. It also supports short years, and that's supported in all versions, and you can specify any type of book overrides here as well. Now, for getting your assets into the solution, you can import from Excel. So for those of you that may decide to do your own import, you can use a standard Excel workbook or a CSV file. It will take flat files like a tab delimited or CSV or a standard Excel workbook where you can actually import your assets from a spreadsheet. Of course, Jen's team would be happy to take care of all of that for you and get this installed and have it turnkey for you. So that is certainly also an option for you. Let's talk a little bit about the general information fields up above. All of these fields are customizable. So if you think about what information do you want to capture in your asset details, if you're using another system now, that might be a good starting point to look at what data you're capturing. If you use an Excel spreadsheet, you can certainly look at what fields of information you're capturing. But certainly you're going to want to capture things such as your GL account info, because this is how you're going to be mapping that data in your journal entry report. When that is actually sent out to go to Sage 300, each asset, you need to have the appropriate GL account information assigned to that asset detail. You can certainly capture things like asset class. You can use multiple fields for identifying location, for example, and any other information you choose. Now, some other considerations here. If you're, let's say, a hotel chain with multiple locations and you want to be able to identify assets by location, you can use multiple fields here for identifying, for example, what state or city it's in, what physical location, if there's multiple buildings at that site, maybe what department, floor number, room number, and so on, because all of that information is searchable and you can sort and subtotal by any of these fields on the reporting side. So a quick example of that, if I wanted to run something like my depreciation expense report, I can certainly run this as is. It's going to spit the report out, system number 1 to the end for any of the books that I choose. But if you go to Format Report, this is where I can actually come in and tell it I want to sort and subtotal by location, asset class. I can literally use any of the fields, and I can sort and subtotal this up to 3 layers deep. So if, for example, I wanted to sort and subtotal by location, maybe below that by asset class, let's say, I can do that, and maybe below that by GL asset account, I can absolutely do all of the above here. So very important that you do think about what information you need to capture in these field details so that you can leverage using that, excuse me, on the back end on your reporting side. A little bit more about these fields. So to customize any of these fields, and if you notice, for example, when I clicked in my GL account field, it's showing my full account list. You can actually turn on the Smart List Manager here, where you're going to customize fields, populate your chart of accounts. If you don't want to do this manually, you can actually import your assets in the system first, where this would be blank, turn on the Smart List Manager and just hit fill, and it would actually look at each unique entry it sees in each asset detail and populate that as your list. So that is an option as well. GL account information field is pretty important, of course, and that one will actually take 100 characters, anything alphanumeric. So you should have no problems with whatever numbering scheme you're using. Your description field will take 80 characters, and your asset ID field will actually take up to 50 characters. That's the important field if you're going to be using the tracking module for doing physical inventory, which is this field here, because that is the field that will actually translate to your barcode number. So if you do go that route, you're going to be doing physical inventories, tagging those assets. When you scan that barcode, translates to that number. That's how it identifies that I'm looking at this Dell XPS 15 asset ID number as displayed here. Now let's talk about some of the other fields that's going to be important to you. Transactions. This is going to capture data surrounding transfers or disposals. You have the ability to do full or partial transfers or disposals in the system quite easily, and those transactions would show up here. You can add notes about anything you choose, and you can also attach images, invoices, receipts, and so on, and it will take a nice variety of file types. So if you can take a picture of it, scan it, you can attach it. PDF files, JPEGs, PNG, TIFF, and so on. And I can even link multiple images or invoices to multiple assets. So I can take a single PO, for example, if I've ordered 20 computers on that, I can link that PO to all of those assets, no problem in the system. So it gives you some really great functionality there. A couple of important mass changes that's going to be important. If you are doing bonus depreciation, remember I showed you where I looked at the tax rule changes. It showed that table where your bonus depreciation is retroactive back to September 28 of 2017. I can actually make changes to my bonus percentage to an individual asset, all the assets, or any subset of assets. These are all of the groups I have created here. So it gives you the ability to make changes on the fly to bonus percentage for any group of assets. The other bulk change you can also do in the system, I can actually make changes to depreciation method or estimated life. So if you do have some group of assets, for example, that you want to take advantage of those tax extenders and change the depreciation method and life, you can actually go here and do that. The bulk edit is going to have you acknowledge you've done a backup. I can choose what group of assets I want, which books I want to make the changes to, and I can change either the depreciation method from anything to something else or estimated life. It will actually take years and months, so be sure to actually enter both fields. And I will be able to make that change for assets as of a current depreciation through date. If I choose to, I can go back to whatever my current depreciation through date is, or I can go back to the place and service date and retain any beginning data, such as the beginning accumulated depreciation or anything if I've done some prior adjustment and I want to keep that information as part of the asset history. So it does give you a lot of flexibility in how you make those changes en masse. For disposals, you can do full disposals or partial disposals in the system, no problems. I can do a disposal of multiple assets or an individual asset at once. So for example, this is an asset I've done a partial disposal on. I can come back, review this information at any point. I can actually pull up the actual transaction, and since this was a partial disposal, I can actually come in and further do an additional partial disposal, or I could do a full disposal, just to show you how quickly that works. I'm going to just choose tomorrow. You can choose whatever date you want to for a disposal date. I can do sale, abandonment, like-kind exchange, whatever type of disposal I want. If I'm doing a full disposal, I can simply enter my cash, non-cash, or expensive sale. If I'm doing a partial disposal, I would say yes here and actually enter the value of the portion that I'm going to dispose of. So let me go ahead and actually do that here. Let's say I'm going to dispose of $3,500. And our one here, we're looking at value, not quantity. So as long as you can identify the value of the portion you're disposing. So if you've got 10 computers at $1,000 each, you're going to dispose of 3 of them, you would put $3,000 here. Or if it's a conference room, let's say, and where you have a conference room table, chairs, and maybe some other pieces there, you identify the value of the portion you're going to dispose of. I'd also recommend putting in description. And that is actually going to be helpful if you've done multiple partial disposals and determining which date you did what transaction. It's going to calculate the remaining amount. So based on me disposing that $3,500, depreciation is going to continue based on that $4,500. I can go ahead and put in any cash proceeds, any expensive sale, and just hit calculate, and it's going to calculate my gain loss across all the books. Now, if you notice, there is a noticeable difference between net book value between tax and book. That's because I'm doing bonus depreciation for tax, straight line for the internal book, and it calculates appropriately. Now, I can override this gain loss calculation. I can defer or choose not to recognize any of these books individually. And if I took investment tax credit, my recapture info would be recalculated here. For those of you doing bonus depreciation, this worksheet will be important. I can actually preview the worksheet. And if you notice here, if you're doing section 179, you'd see that recapture information calculated. If you're doing the 168 allowance, that's factored in as well. So if everything looks great, I can go ahead and do my disposal, and it's taking me to that transactions tab. Now, since I've done 2 partial disposals, you'll see they're both displayed here. And this is where the description comes in. Since I have multiple transactions, if I need to come back in here and take a look at anything, and I want to know when I dispose of a particular part, I can see that it's the transaction dated 6/27/19 that I disposed of part A. So I can actually selectively review any of those transactions and export or print a worksheet if needed. Now, the History tab captures all of those types of transactions. So you'll see for today's date, asset was partially disposed. It will show the date done in the system separate from your actual disposal date or gain loss calculation date. It's also going to capture who did it. It's also going to capture the fact that my values based on that partial disposal for all of my books, my cost basis was now adjusted down from 8,000 to 4,500. My cost basis for this particular asset were all the same, so hence a single entry with all the books. If I had a different cost basis for tax than book, it would actually split those out separately. Now, let's say someone gave you the wrong asset ID to do a full or partial disposal on. I can reverse that at any point. I can simply come here, delete last transaction, like it never happened. Back to the previous transaction only. values have been returned to where they were previously. The history tab does not erase that information. That's also here. Just creates a new entry that the last transaction was reversed, when it was done, and who did it. And you can actually limit who can do those types of transactions, and that's all available here in the system administration, where you can actually create multiple profiles and assign users to those profiles. And those restrictions would then apply. If you need to be able to do multiple disposals or transfers at once, you can search based on any of the fields and a variety of operators. You can be specific or, cast a wide net, as I'm doing in my case here, and I can select some subset of the assets where I can either select all, or I can go in here and use my control key or shift key and select just a few. I can do a bulk disposal or bulk transfer in one shot. So when you take a look at it from this standpoint, the big difference here is I don't have the ability to now say, hey, this one was 5,000 in cash proceeds, this one was 1,000, so on. Any cash or non-cash are going to evenly get distributed across all of those assets that I'm doing as a group. So keep that in mind. Let me jump into some of the reporting here quickly and show you some of those standard reports that I talked about. Of course, you'll need to do things like your depreciation expense report, and I'm simply going to run this unsorted so you can get an idea of what the standard report looks like. Now, you can tweak these reports, change the sort order, add or remove columns of data, and save that as a custom report. And I'll show you how easy it is to do that. So here's your standard depreciation expense report, unsorted. Now, as I stated, I could sort this, in any way I choose, by location, below that by asset class, and so on. And what that's going to do is break that report up and actually give you, I'll actually do this by asset class, let's say, give an example. And it's going to break it up into whatever number of categories you selected and give you the net totals for each category, and then the grand totals at the very end. Now, all of the reports in the system are actually exportable. You can export them out to Excel, CSV file, Crystal report, so you have many options here. So here is that same report where you can see it's given me each asset class and my net totals for each, and then my grand totals will be on the last page. Exporting options, you can push them out to a Crystal reports, PDF, CSV, standard Excel, Excel data only. So you have many options to choose from. Now, if I did some customization, I just want to show you how that would actually show up here. If you take a look at the depreciation expense report, the standard reports in gray, all of these in yellow, I changed something, either the sort order or added a column of data. So let's take a look at this one and what's different. No change in sort order, but if you go to customize, I actually added an additional column of data that did not exist in that report, told it to give me a total on the end, and I've saved it as a custom report. So you have all of those options that you can do in the system. Other standard reports I mentioned, your 4562. It'll generate an actual 4562 form, which you can, of course, export. And if you're sitting at your year end, it's going to generate the actual worksheet that goes along with this. Okay. And of course, you also have the tax expense report, which would be used to reconcile that 4562. For journal entry to get this over to Sage 300, this report is what will actually be sent out for Sage 300. Just want you to have a look at the standard report itself. If you take a look at that, so you would not need to actually run this manually. For Sage 300, there's actually a link, and you would configure that as your favorite, where you're going to tell it you want to send this out to Sage 300, and you would simply enter your current posting period. So in my case, I believe I'm depreciated through 5/31. And if you have multiple companies, you'll have the ability to select which company you're doing this journal entry for. Hit preview, and it's going to show you that same report I just showed you, and post, and it's actually going to send that report out for any group of the assets you select, or you can certainly run this for all the assets, which more than likely is the way you'd run it. Preview and post, and it's going to send that file out formatted for Sage 300. Some other standard reports you may take advantage of. Of course, there's going to be things such as annual activity for looking at current year additions, roll forward report that you may need for year end, and of course, things like a disposal report as well. Actually, I'll run the disposal report. The disposal report, you can run that based on a date range. It's not depreciation dependent. So is the transfer report. And this is where you'll capture all of your realized gain loss info from your full or partial disposals. And you can run this for any time period you want, for a month, a year, multiple years, where you're going to capture your net proceeds and totals, realized gain loss info, anything that was deferred or not recognized. And as I stated, there are many standard reports depending on what your particular needs are built into the system. There are actually 28 standard reports built in, and you can certainly customize them to how it meets your needs to get the type of reporting you need out of the system. For routine asset addition in the solution, of course, you can import assets in mass from Excel. You may have some scenarios where you're going to come in and manually add an asset. This is where those templates come in. So if I've got templates created, I can simply choose a template where I've included GL account info, location info. I've even included depreciation method, estimated life, and property type. So the only thing I would need to do at this point is give it an actual acquisition date, place in service date, and value, and save it, and I'm done. And I can actually replicate this. So if I've got multiple assets that I need to create manually in the system, and there are multiple of the same type, let's say I have 10 computers, I can do the first one, tell it to replicate 9 copies of this, and I've got my 10 computers for the scenarios where you may be doing addition from this case. In most cases, you'll be doing your asset additions from a PO or from the accounts payable side in Sage 300, which will have access to all these templates, making that process pretty easy for you. All right, so let's talk about the planning module real quick. I'm going to just do a quick high level of the other 2 modules so that we can leave some time for Q&A on the end. The planning module, just to give you an idea of how this works. You can use this for different types of projects you have going. I can have multiple projects going at a time. Just like in the depreciation, you can get a quick snapshot of what's going on with the assets in this project, see what's spent or unspent of the budget, and I can look at my actual spend against an original or revised budget. So when you create your project, you're going to have some approved amount or some budgeted amount. If things change as you're going through that project, which they often do, instead of having to wipe that number out, I can actually come in here and add a revised budget and let that be my moving target as things change. So that way you can always report against whatever the original approved amount was versus where things actually are now. Each of these items you're looking at here at this level are what's actually going to become a fixed asset. So if I go into one of my details here, you'll have quite a few fields you can customize. You can actually map any of these fields from the planning module here directly to depreciation. So if you want to capture vendor information, AFE numbers, or even assign an asset ID from here, you can do that. Same as at the project level, you can track your spend against 2 sets of numbers. And if you go to the transactions fields below that, these are where you're going to get invoices from accounts payable or PO, that will roll up against the cost for that asset. Let me actually go on to one that has more transactions here. So this one actually has 27 transactions. So this may be things like permits, surveys, materials, labor, whatever the case may be. If in your projects you have a large number of these types of transactions, these can actually be imported from Excel as well. Now, once spending is complete, this is where you can actually tell it that spending is complete and you're ready to place an item in service. Let me go to one that's not been placed in service yet. You can actually split this into multiple assets of equal or different values, and you can assign a template. This module also have access to all of the templates in the depreciation side. So once I'm ready to create assets from here, even if the entire project's not complete, any item here where spending is complete, I can simply choose create asset. It's going to list out any asset that spending is complete. And I can choose, using my control key here, to just send to this company. If I have multiple companies in depreciation, I can select all, send them to a single company. But you will be able to see all of the companies you actually have in the depreciation side. And these items would then be placed in service, ready to start depreciation. For reporting, there's some pretty robust reporting here as well. If you need to see something like a consolidated report, looking at multiple projects, and I can filter this out based on all items, what's expensed, what's capitalized, and so on, and choose what subset or all of the assets I want to see in my project. I can look at this in subtotals or full detail against an original or a revised budget. So I can run this here if I want a quick snapshot. It's going to show the projects that I have selected. So in my case, the one I'm in, as well as one other project. It's going to show you your budget, your actual spend, whether or not you're over or under budget. And I can actually drill down and see the details here. So even though overall this project is under budget, I do have an item here that's 6 to 9 grand over budget. Another one that's 118 over here. So I can see full detail, or I can actually see it in subtotals only if I choose. For reporting on this side, I can also do custom reporting. So this is going to be a custom report that I have in Crystal Reports, and I'll have access to using Crystal Reports in depreciation or any of the modules because it's fully integrated into the database. So I can create any type of ad hoc reporting here or in the depreciation side because I have access to every field in the database, be it for a project or depreciation, so I can create any type of custom reports. Now, anything that I've sent from the planning module to depreciation will actually be easily identifiable in depreciation because it actually will create a group that shows planning and a date and timestamp, and I'll be able to actually easily identify any of those items. So if you take a look at this, it's going to show the date and timestamp from planning, and if I send one item or 100 items, they'll all show up here in this group. Because I use a template, it showed up as you're seeing, ready to start depreciating, and I had to do nothing else because the combination of information, acquisition date, in-service date, and value coming from the planning module, as well as any of the data fields that I mapped from planning, such as this field here, are all coming over, being merged with my template data, which provided property type, depreciation method, and estimated life for all my books, ready to start depreciation. So it really makes that process much easier. Now, for a quick look in the tracking module, this is what would be used for doing your physical inventory, where you will be able to use, as I stated, either an Android app, where I can push out an inventory list out to an Android device, phone or tablet, be able to scan that barcode, update information that was changed, and once I finish that inventory, I can even actually take a picture of the asset, send that data back to the tracking software over Microsoft OneDrive, and be able to actually reconcile that data. Now, just to give you a quick look inside the tracking module here, everything should look very familiar, but if I go into any of these asset details, it'll have all of the 28 fields from the depreciation side, but In addition to those fields, there's an additional 12 fields. So for example, your IT staff wants to keep track of serial numbers or MAC addresses, IP addresses, software version, other things that may not be important to accounting, they can actually leverage using those fields. But if you notice, no access to the book field, so there's actually no chance of them doing anything to impact depreciation. If you had images attached, those are all still here as well. Any groups that you created, in other words, different subsets of the assets, are all going to be here as well. So if I wanted to do an inventory of just assets at a particular location, I can create a group based on that, use that as an inventory list where I can define an inventory, push that out to multiple devices as well, and complete that inventory process and accept any changes once it is complete. Just to show you what that reconciliation report looks like on the back end of this, I'm going to run this for the group that I did my inventory on last year, and it's going to show you all of the assets that were found, not found, or changed. Assets not found get a status code of N, so I can identify quickly, hey, these assets are missing. These would be my ghost assets. These are assets that are costing you money because A, you bought them, they're not in service, they're MIA, you're paying insurance premium for them, and you certainly are going to be paying property taxes on. So it's a three-way cost that you want to identify and take care of. So when someone has done an inventory, you come up with things like these that are missing. Now you can actually do a proper disposal, get them off the books, and capture that gain loss information for tax purposes. Anything found with no changes, get a status of O, and anything found with changes, a status of C. And of course, you can export this out to various formats. So if you choose to export this out to a CSV file, maybe circulate this to other departments where they can check if that tag number, so their computer is in their department, and at least be able to filter out if things truly are missing or if they've simply been moved with no one having knowledge of it. All right, so I do want to leave some time for Q&A, so I'm actually going to stop at this point, and I'm going to have Jenny take a look and see if there are any questions in the chat. We want to make sure we have some time for that.
Hi, so I'm going to step in for Jen. At this time, we are going to open up the chat option. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to take a few minutes, and then we'll answer them. Okay, so we have a few coming in. The first one that we see is, do you have to get all the modules, or can you just get depreciation?
Oh, that's a great question. You can actually get depreciation only, which certainly is, I'd say probably at least half the customers. But that usually changes because they usually start seeing the value of adding the tracking module, and you can certainly add other modules later. But because this is the core of the system, we do have customers that will start off with depreciation only, get that up and running, and then add the tracking module for doing physical inventories later on.
Thanks, Wayne. The second question that came in is, can you transfer assets between companies?
Oh, absolutely. You can transfer assets within the current company. So let's say I want to transfer this asset here. I can choose today's date. And if I want to transfer within the current company, I would leave that here. And I can certainly tell it, hey, I want to transfer this from my bakery to, whatever, one of my store locations. As part of the transfer, I can actually update any of the fields as part of the transfer as well. But I can also go between companies. So if you have multiple companies, I can actually do that as well. It must be the same company type, so standard US to standard US, or Canadian to Canadian company, or a government nonprofit, and so on, because of the difference in tax rules. So you can absolutely do transfers, full or partial transfers, by the way, within a company or between companies.
Awesome. We'll take time for one more question, so if you guys want to write in any more, and then we will go from there. Okay, one more question that came in. Where can I see more information about setting up integration with Sage 300?
Oh, that's actually in the links guide in the Sage fixed asset software. So if you do have this installed, we will certainly be able to send you a copy of this in PDF if you like. But the links guide shows how to set up the integration between the fixed asset module and any of our ERPs. So in your case, if you're using standard Sage 300, or if you're using the AP or PO module here, it'll actually walk you through step by step with how to set that up. But I'm sure the folks at Acumen would be happy to help you with that.
Thanks again. So I think with that, we're going to wrap up. If you guys have any additional questions, please feel free to call us at 407-965-2411. Or if you want to email us, our email is am@acumenfl.com. Again, thanks for watching. Hope you guys have a great rest of the week. And thank you, Wayne.
All right. Appreciate your time, everyone.
Have a good one. Bye.